Good evening, everyone. On today's new episode of Rock and Roll Detention, we're going back to the 90s to have a look into the major metal bands who replaced their singers. Anthrax, Iron Maiden, Judas Priest, and Motley Crue. There are others, but these are the big four. So we're going to go deep. We're going to look at the good, the bad, and everything else in between. But first, joining me on tonight's episode are two of our correspondents. From the band Motorlord, Ian O'Rourke. Ian, how are you?
What's going on, brother? Glad to be back with you.
Absolutely. Things are going well in the Motorlord land. You guys played a couple shows recently?
Yeah, we're running the gauntlet a little bit. We got like 4 shows stretched out over a month, so it's almost like every other weekend for a bit there. It's been crazy, but it's been fun. We're having a good time doing it.
That's super. And joining us on his Virgin Metal Mayhem ROC run, his heavy metal debut on the podcast, also from New Jersey, Vinyl Vince McDowell. Vince, welcome to Metal Mayhem ROC.
Thank you so much. I'm excited. I've enjoyed your guys' opinion on many things. You've gave me new opinions on old bands, and you've introduced me to new things. So I'm excited to talk music. Two knowledgeable guys like yourself.
Well,
let's get to
it. That's pushing it. The knowledgeable, we're good at faking it. Let's put it that way. Fake it till you make it.
Well, I hope to fake it with you.
Well, Vince is an
Lance, how you been?
I'm good. Very, very good. Vince is an expert. He and I go back 30-something years from our college fraternity days, and we've seen a lot of metal shows way back then and up to now. For you listeners, please check out some of his reviews on the blog. He does an excellent show review, an excellent writer. We've gotten that good college education from Montclair State University. So, Vince, welcome to the team. So, hey, guys, tonight, this is something we've been talking about for a long time. And, there was a period of time in the 90s, and we've covered this in our History of Heavy Metal series on a lot of the individual years, that this was a changing time for metal music. And I think you look back in time and you say, man, there are 4 major bands that we all love, and we still love to this day, that they made bold moves. This wasn't, replacing a drummer or bass player. This was going front and center to the singer. But Ian, just like what was going on in the 90s around that time with the scene?
Well, like we had talked on the History of Metal, early 90s, it's right around the same time when grunge was starting to poke its head up and jump into the scene. You saw that shift, that post Guns N' Roses, post And Justice for All, everything started getting darker and heavier. There was more of a grit. There was more of a street. There was more something. And then grunge kind of came in, and that kind of cultivated even more of this brooding kind of sound. So as you started ushering in bands like Pantera, and you had, Skid Row, Jersey alum, that you were aware of. Some of these other bands that were coming through, you could see how things were shifting, and the temperament changed. Like bands that weren't as heavy started getting heavier, and bands that were like thrashy and fast all of a sudden started adopting some of that groove laden, slower, brooding metal. Was it, to coin the term groove metal, as some people have, I mean, it kind of did fit the mark, so I think that, when we go into at least 1 or 2 of these bands that we're going to discuss, you can definitely see how that came to be.
Yeah. And listen, we lived through this period of time, right? We were all kids of the 80s listening to the hair bands. I mean, Vince, you and I were in college together, and we lived this. We saw a lot of shows together in both the old and the newer bands. But, what was your impression of this period? I mean, the industry was changing, the grunge was in, record sales were down. I think a lot of the byproduct of maybe these band member changes was also a result of that too, right?
Yeah. I mean, at that point, a lot of these bands have been together for 10, 15 years. So they're starting to feel themselves a little bit. I think they've had success. They've been on the road a long time. The money, the extracurricular activities, they all started adding up. And, when you spend that much time with the same amount of people in a band together for that long, you tend to wear each other out. So it seems to be like around the same time, a lot of these bands, like you alluded to, just started to make a lot of drastic changes to personnel and sound.
Yeah, I think I think maybe first up in the sequence of these bands was Anthrax. They made the change first, right? In I think it was the early 90s. And it was funny from what I recall, they had maybe come off Persistence of Time and they signed a big record deal with Elektra. And it seemed like right after they signed that big deal with Elektra, they fired Joey Belladonna. And it's no secret this was in the making for a while, right? This was not something that maybe had a direct impact of anything that he maybe did, but I think they were looking to change their sound. So, I mean, what a kick in the nuts to that guy, right? Like you said, Vince, he started their career, got them off to groundbreaking, success. And then as they're getting maybe leveling off due to the industry, they throw him to the street, but they bring in Johnny Bush of Armored Saint, of course. And, listen, I know Anthrax and the guys, they go on record saying they were following John Bush for years, trying to recruit him. And it was just a matter of could they actually pry him away? But, when they ended up choosing him, Ian, what's your take on this? Because I think of the four bands we're talking about, this was the one that had the biggest impact on the sound of the band that really changed from what they were to what they would become.
Oh, huge. Yeah. And it's funny because, you go back and you listen to some of the, John Bush has always been a man that was a wanted man because Metallica early on had considered, trying to recoup him, but he was happy in Armored Saint, didn't want to leave his boys, which, kudos to him for not doing it because Armored Saint put out great material. But I know that you and I had discussed this before. The Bush era Anthrax, for me personally, is some of my favorite music. And it's no knock to, I love Among the Living and Spreading the Disease and stuff like that. But that era, and I think it was at that time too, they made just enough of a change in their sound, but the temperament that Bush brought with his singing and the way that he sang, he sounded distinctly different than Joey Belladonna. Joey Belladonna had that higher pitched voice. Bush always had that mid-tone, kind of gravelly, almost like he smoked cigarettes, but I don't think he ever smoked. And then he could belt out these notes, that would just be like, wow, he just peeled the paint off the wall. And the writing, the other thing that was I think that was a casualty to the whole, probably from the dismay of everything that had transpired, was after they do Sound of White Noise, is Danny Spitz, leaving the band. But I still think that, everything that they did at that particular point, and being somebody that was knee deep into, Pantera at that time, it was like perfect. It was that kismet, that same level of heavy and groovy and dark and, bouncing and everything else. It just had a different kind of vibe to it, but it was still Anthrax because they still had those moments. And I told this to you before, they always have had that ability to have that New York hardcore come out, even with, with the stuff that they did with Bush, all of a sudden now it comes out. It's like, there it is. There's the Agnostic Front. There's the Madball. There's all that good stuff. So,
but I think I think the sound of the band really changed. I almost look at it when I look back at the John Bush era. I almost think of it as two different bands. I mean, you mentioned, Ian, it was like a subtle change. I think it was a drastic change. I mean, Vince, I know you love some of these CDs. Like, talk about some of the songs or the albums. Like, what was your impressions of, when they came out with the Sound of White Noise? Like when you heard Only for the first time or Potter's Field.
Right. Well, I mean, James Hetfield called Only the perfect song. So that's a good start when you're starting out with a new singer and a new sound. But I was listening to it today, and if you listen to it, it's a very, very angry album. It's a lot of self-loathing, a lot of mistrust, a lot of contempt for people. It's one of the lyrics is, "I never gave a damn." I think I have it here somewhere. I never gave a damn I was never even a fan. The only thing that brings me smile is your pain. If I ever had the chance, I'd kick out your chair just to watch you dance. I mean, that's one of the happier lyrics. It's just a very angry album with a lot of mistrust, like Invisible with Fake Friends. And it was a great album, but when you really get into the lyrics, it's super dark.
But then they ended up, listen, they went commercial though as well. I mean, Only was the single, but you know, Room for One More. I mean, that had legs. It was on FM radio at the time, all the time. I mean, that was like your short 3.5 to 4 minute, had melody on there. You know,
High Pro Glow.
I mean, Black Lodge. That was like almost like a dark kind of mysterious song, you know. So there was a lot of stuff out there.
To Twin Peaks, wasn't it?
Yeah.
What's that?
It was an homage to Twin Peaks.
Yes.
Big fan of Twin Peaks. So
you know, but then let's say you go into Stomp 442, right? I mean, that came out a couple years later. I mean, that one, again, what did they come out with? Another radio song, Fueled. So it was weird how Anthrax, you know, they were on the MTV in the late 90s with Antisocial and a few of the other songs, right? And they were getting more of that mainstream play. But now they're back with another singer and a whole different sound back on FM radio and MTV yet again, right? So, Ian, did you have any chance? Did you see them live with Johnny Bush?
No, and you know, I kicked myself in the ass for it because I missed them when they came through. They played, I believe it was Utica at the Odd, right around the same time that the whole debacle with Pantera and Manson on the one tour where they just completely destroyed the seats in the auditorium, and they said, yep, that's it. We're not having any more heavy bands here. And it was a while before they allowed anybody big to come through. But Stomp 442, man. You nailed out songs that they were putting out. You had Fuel.
I don't know what happened there. We had a technical difficulty.
Oof. Sorry.
Continue.
As I was saying, though, you had, you know, Pantera on this side, Metallica, you know, Black Album on this side. They all found that ground down the middle where they were able to kind of fit that bill. Anthrax did it. Megadeth did it. Slayer tried to do it. Not as well. So out of the big four bands, they all were making an attempt to be a little bit more acceptable, approachable, you know, digestible. I don't even know what word to put on it, but the stuff that they were coming out with, I appreciated it because when you were driving in your car and you got sick of hearing Kurt Cobain crying about something, next thing you know, Anthrax comes on, you're like, okay, now I'm happy again.
But what it did to a lot of these changes to the bands, it gave them something to talk about, something to advertise, right? It was something they could call out to say, we got new blood in the band, you know, rebirth of the band, whether it was true or not. But it gave them something to go out there and call out, right? And then everybody was intrigued and wanted to see him live. I mean, I recall going out, and the first time they played New York, it was, I think, May of 1993. They played a place called the Grand in the city, and Gene Simmons showed up, and they played She with Gene Simmons. And Gene just walked out on stage in street clothes and grabbed the mic, and, you know, Scott Ian is like half his size running underneath him. But listen, they got on some big tours. I mean, they toured with Fight in the middle years. They played over and over and over in all the cities. I saw them later on with Monster Magnet. You know, so they were around, and you felt their presence all the time, you know.
Sure.
I don't know, like one of my favorite metal albums of all time is I Love Volume 8. I think that album is just top to bottom. It's got it all. It's heavy. It's got a groove to it. It's got melody to it. It's really, really good seeing that one. So, you know,
thrashy,
dark, is a little all over the place though.
Yeah.
I mean, I listened to it today. I really enjoyed it. It's another one of those where the more I listen to it now, the more I enjoy it. Man, that album is all over the place.
Yep.
But a song like Catharsis, right? Catharsis and Crush, like Catharsis is
Crush is amazing.
I mean, that's just a heavy
yeah.
song. Like
Yes,
you can't take a song like Catharsis and put that back in the Joey Belladonna catalog. It doesn't fit. Bottom line, it doesn't fit.
Yeah.
Right.
But you can tell.
MOD and they kind of went MOD and SOD too with the 604 and the Cup of Joe.
Yes. Yeah. I was going to say, and that's where that hardcore comes back into play a little bit. But, the one thing, you could tell that there was that relationship with the band Helmet at the time back then, that, with Frankie going off and playing bass with them for a minute, you could see where a band like that, because they were that alternative, metal kind of side, not really grunge, a little more Prong or Tool, dark and kind of moody. You can see where that may have rubbed off a little bit on these guys too, spending time with them. And of course they were friends with the guys in Biohazard and, so the entire collection, those 4 albums with John Bush, I hold him in a high regard.
Absolutely.
There's the Pantera connection too there, right? Because wasn't Dime on all 4 of those albums? He soloed on all those albums. So they were
well, I know specifically on the 2. And then because Cadillac Rock Box and Strap It On from We've Come For You All. He soloed on, and then obviously, King Size from Stomp 442.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think we could all agree, like, if we're going to look fondly about one of these bands and what they did, I think the Anthrax stuff is unanimous. It was good. But I remember in the 90s there was kind of these weird touring packages because things were changing, and I remember specifically there was a period where Motley Crue was touring with Anthrax, and I think that was the infamous tour where maybe Scotty and jumped over George Steinbrenner in the Tampa Stadium, and he stole home plate and got arrested and whatever. I think it was on that tour. But moving over to Motley Crue, right now, this one, I think we're going to have a bit of a different perspective on this one. I mean, Motley Crue, biggest band or one of the biggest bands of the 80s, comes out. They hit into the 90s like everybody else, drug fueled, infighting, too much money, too many drugs. Vince Neil quits, or maybe they say he was fired. It doesn't matter. He's out of the band. And, there's nothing left of Motley Crue in 1992, 93 or so. So they go out and they recruit John Corabi. So who's John Corabi? I mean, who the hell is he? Let's be honest. Who's the band The Scream he came from? Like, do either of you guys know how they got him and why he was picked to go into Motley Crue?
Well, story goes, so Bruce Bolet, who was the second guitarist in Racer X with Paul Gilbert, he was the guitar player that started the Scream. It was he and I think Juan or Eldreddy, he was the bass player. He was in there for a minute. And then it was John Corabi was the singer. And these guys, Tommy and Nikki, had seen Corabi with the Scream on the Strip. They had heard the song played on, I don't know if it was KNAC or one of the LA stations, one of the singles that they had released. And they thought, man, this guy's got a great voice. And they heard who the band was. So they went and they checked them out. Well, just happened to be that, at that time, this is a really unknown band. It's that tumultuous time, early 90s. Long-haired heavy metal guys are kind of passe because the grunge stuff is coming in. So they took a shot. They asked him if he wanted to join up with the band. I will say it's probably one of the best decisions that they ever could have made in their lives.
Why so?
Personally.
I don't remember anything about that Motley Crue album other than John Corabi eventually went on and played with Rat. And he's kind of just one of these C-level guys that, he played with Bruce Kulick eventually, Union and whatever's, but like what? Like, Vince, do you know this album? Like, was it good to you?
I definitely liked it. It was a change of sound, like we've alluded to a couple of times with all these bands. To me, it sounds thicker. To Tommy Lee and Nicky were just super tight on this album, in my opinion. The drums and the bass kind of really stand out to me. And Mick just lays in just these really fat groove guitar licks. And Karabi's voice really fits the songs. I mean, there's a couple of really good songs on there, man. Like Hooligan's Holiday obviously was a single. I really dig Misunderstood. I think in a different time, that probably would have been a very big hit for this band.
Yep.
Smoke the Sky kind of gives me a Kickstart My Heart vibe.
Yep.
I mean, it's a little long. It probably could have lost some songs, but overall, it's if this came out with a different band name on it, I think we'd be holding in higher regard.
Right. And Lance, to your credit, Glenn Hughes singing backup on the song Misunderstood, being a close friend of John Karabi's from the scene.
Okay.
So he knew the guys, he knew John, he knew Nicky, he knew all those guys came in and sang backup. I will tell you, and I said this on the History of Metal, during this time period, because it was such a crazy time musically. You're talking, this is 1994. So there's a lot of stuff that really kind of hadn't coalesced yet. You know, you had a couple things that were going on and a couple things that really weren't going on. This album is so dark and brooding and that perfect time snippet for that period. Just like the Anthrax, just like the stuff that was going on with Pantera, just like just all those bands. It was so heavy, and Karabi, lending, playing rhythm guitar and writing songs with Mick Mars. I mean, songs like Uncle Jack and, Vince said it, Smoke the Sky, Hammered, oh my God, is such a freaking slow grooving, heavy riff. And then just to keep all of the old hair metalers happy, they have a song on there called Poison Apples. And it sounds just like something off Dr. Feelgood. It's great.
Yeah, Vince could definitely have sang that if they decided to put it into the set list. Well, maybe not anymore, but he could have sang the song back in the day. It sounds like old Motley Crue.
Yeah,
but so it sounds like you guys enjoyed it, and but it changed the sound of the band. But ultimately, it didn't succeed. Anthrax succeeded commercially. Their career grew little by little. They got back up at the top again. Whereas Motley Crue, it didn't do anything commercially. But again, that was a sign of the times. And with those hair bands, you take out the main singer. That's hard to sell an album, and then you change your sound, right?
It was all about this.
I mean, there was there's lots of funny stories to say they would be touring and they'd almost be giving tickets away at their local radio stations just to try to get 4,000 or 5,000 people in an amphitheater. But I mean, what ultimately happened? Because they only did one album. Like, what happened? Why? If it was so good, why didn't it continue?
Well, and that's why I alluded when I did this with the scratch. I mean, there was talk at the time of, because right around the same time after they got done touring with this album was when Nicky got the rights back to Motley's music. So they held their catalog in their own hands. So any money that was made was Motley money. So they started, then the bubbles started percolating, and it's like, okay, maybe we should try to get this thing going again. I think at that point too, it'd been a little bit of time, water under the bridge. These guys spent so much time together, messed up, that when they finally had a chance, okay, let's see if we can maybe kick this thing off again. I'm not a big fan of the material. I was mentioning to Vince offline, the stuff post the Motley Crue album with Karabi. I don't like Generation Swine. I don't care for that album. Saints of Los Angeles and stuff. Yeah, it was all right. I did see them on that tour, pre Saints of Los Angeles when they came around. That was pretty cool. Louder than hell. I mean, I could hear, we were up in the balcony at the in Syracuse, and Mick Mars's guitar from the stage was so loud, I could feel it hitting me in the face. That's how loud it was. And not PA, the stacks of amplifiers. I'm like, holy Jesus, this is loud. My ears rang for 2 days afterwards.
Well, Ian, hold that thought, because I think we want to come back to that after we talk about all four bands. And we want to talk about just why these replacement singers didn't sustain a long period of time, and eventually it went back to the original singers. That'll be for a little bit later. But moving along, I think let's talk about Iron Maiden, right? I mean, the biggest metal band in the world, maybe globally, aside from Metallica. They come in, and to me, this was the one that maybe disappointed the most. And it may not even be necessarily the quality of the material, but something just didn't add up with Maiden with Blaze Bayley. I mean, okay, let's think about what was going on at that time there, right? I think Maiden came off Fear of the Dark. Bruce had some success, some commercial success with the solo album Tattooed Millionaire. He had recruited Yannick Gers to play guitar in that tour. He eventually comes in as a band member, replaces Adrian Smith. Adrian goes solo. There was definitely some stuff in the air in the Maiden camp. And then what I kind of lost track of this until I was rereading it earlier, that Bruce actually left the band, but agreed to do the remaining tour dates in 93, and they billed it as a farewell tour. Now here in 2023, we can't even imagine there being friction within the Iron Maiden camp. It just doesn't seem possible, but apparently was back then, right? So now they go out. I think Steve Harris had his eye on Blaze Bayley all along because they had toured with Wolfsbane in the early 90s. He's another British guy and that kind of thing, and he liked him. So knowing those kinds of guys, they probably didn't try out 10 guys. They brought him in. He did the trick, and that was it. So they come out and they release their first album. They released 2 albums. Vince, I know you have an opinion of this material, so talk about what this meant to you and the songs.
Let me sum it up, the 2 albums in one little tidbit here. The song The Angel and the Gambler, there's a refrain. Don't you think I'm a savior? Don't you think I could save you? Don't you think I could save your life? In a 9.5-minute song, that's repeated 22 times. To me, that sums it all up. The material is DOA, in my opinion. It's unoriginal. It's uninspired. That first album, where are the guitars? You don't hear anything. It's
exactly.
The songs are all about isolation and war, and going back and listening to both these albums, there's nothing I want to go back and listen to again. And who opens an album with an 11-minute song? It's inconceivable. It goes nowhere. I can't not dislike these 2 albums more. I hate to be that guy that just bashes the new singer, but these albums do nothing for me. It's just.
And I agree with you, Vince. But I disagree with you, and I agree with you because the one thing I don't like about the X Factor is it started them off on these epically long 7, 8, 9, 10, 11-minute songs.
They haven't gotten away from it.
That they haven't. Yeah. And let's be honest, guys. I mean, as much as their latest material is good, it also, how many of these songs do we really need that go on and on and on with the Celtic mid-pace thing? It broods on and on, but I do like songs like Man on the Edge. I think Sign of the Cross is a good one, and the Klansman and the Klansman. Right. I mean,
and the Klansman, yeah.
The last tour they were playing last fall, they're still playing a couple of these songs live with Bruce singing, so you could tell that they like them.
I give them credit for that. At least they acknowledge that period in their past, as opposed to some of these other bands. But I'm sorry, those songs drag. I'd rather listen to the 4 other Iron Maiden songs they could fit in the time frame that those 2 songs take. They don't do anything for me. I mean, yelling freedom over and over again. Yeah.
Ian, what's your take on Blaze Bayley though? Forget the songs. I think we agree there on the songs. But what about Blaze Bayley singing?
And I think at first it kind of took everybody aback because unlike, one of the other bands we're going to talk about, they didn't get somebody that had that kind of approach or a similar approach to their singing or ability in their singing. Like Bruce, he sounded distinctly different. He had a totally different voice. So that right there kind of, you're like, well, hold on a second. How's this going to work? Iron Maiden, I mean, he's going to sing, Flight of Icarus. he's going to sing, Power Slave, he's going to sing these songs, with this, this big voice. But the next part of it was, I think just that he just didn't have the energy. There was an energy that Bruce conveyed, even on record. We were used to seeing him running around on stage and, being able to be, acrobatic and insane, but it was very lackluster. Not that he sang bad. It was just very lackluster. And to, like Vince said, was he writing the lyrics with Steve Harris? Did they have maybe there was a lack of inspiration for what they wanted to try to do? Because some of the lyrics just kind of fell flat. It just, there was no, what's the moral of the story?
There was nobody there to rein in Steve Harris either. It was obviously these two albums are missing Adrian and Bruce in the worst way. Right. And I don't think anybody had the nuts to say, Steve, we got to shorten some of these songs, or we got to pep them up, because there's nothing there.
Yeah, I'd agree. Now, thinking about the touring aspect of this, I remember Bruce was out on the Balls to Picasso tour, and he had Adrian Smith on his touring guitarist. And they kind of crossed paths over a couple of year period. It was maybe 96, 97, somewhere around there. They were both out on the road at the same time, or at least the same couple of years. And there's a club that Vince and I have gone to in the past, is no longer there, called the Birch Hill Nightclub. And both bands played the Birch Hill Nightclub. And I remember Iron Maiden played it on the X Factor. Ian, this place was... Vince, what did it hold? 500-600 people, 700 people at most. I'll never forget the night seeing Maiden. It was a weeknight, and it was so crowded in there. I couldn't even get up the stairs from the outside because you got to the top of the stairs, and I think I was at the second stair down, not really seeing the stage. It was that many people there. And this was still when you could smoke in clubs. But just to think that, like, Iron Maiden's playing a 500-seat bar? Like, what?
I think it was sad. I think it was sad times for a lot of bands, for a minute, not consistently, but like when you had a situation like this with Maiden, I think that they just, the tires fell off the vehicle and they were kind of stuck, and then, you got to make money somehow. You decided to put it out on the road. You better pay for it. So,
yeah. Even that second tour, they only did 18 dates in the U.S., so that kind of tells you it wasn't going anywhere.
Sure.
So,
wow, was that so, Vince? I know I saw the show at the Roseland with Dio opened, and that was a whole nother thing. Dio fell prey to the same period of time where he's opening for Iron Maiden at Roseland. And it's not selling tickets anywhere. 18 shows in the States. What does that tell you?
18 shows was the whole U.S. tour. And I don't even think the whole tour itself lasted longer than 6 months. Sure. That the virtual X1, whatever you want to call it.
The one with Future Real on it. So
right.
Well, guys, I think we agree that, again, maybe there's some good songs that came out of this, but overall, it wasn't what we'll remember Iron Maiden for. So, guys, there's only one band left to talk about, and it's the big one here, Judas Priest. Right? I think this is the one that maybe had the biggest success overall. It had the biggest hype. I think it came with a great story. And ultimately, these guys made a nice career with Tim Ripper Owens. So, Ian, what was going on in the Priest camp that, let's say, Rob Halford decided on his own to exit? Because this was a different situation. This was not, tensions in the band and things of that nature. Yeah. What was going on with Rob at this headspace at this time?
Well, I know that it was, around this time when Rob decided to, come out of the closet and let everybody know that he was gay, which Scotty Ian, bless his heart. I remember years ago on one of the metal documentaries saying, he goes, as if, he goes, there's a guy running around in assless chaps and, bondage wear and everything else. He goes, how funny is that all of these masculine macho guys are banging their heads and screaming for Rob Halford, who's gay. But, to his credit, Rob, I think wanted to try something else. He wanted to take some time away. He wanted to be Rob rather than being the lead singer of Judas Priest. And, he fortunately was able to turn around faster to do something on his own than Priest did, because it was good, 4 years before you really heard anything, 3-4 years. And then they finally, put out new material with Tim the Ripper Owens. And, we've had discussions about this. Do I think that body of work is terrible? No. Is it my favorite Priest? No. But I think that there's still some good material that did come out of those albums with Ripper. And you're right. I mean, think about, you're talking one of the biggest heavy metal bands ever. I mean, guys that changed the face of metal. Another one of those bands that comes after, the Sabbaths and stuff, that cultivated and shaped what heavy metal was to become, existing during this time period and doing it fairly well. The material that they put out, they were still hanging in there tight, and there was nobody kicking them off stage for sure.
Now, before we get into the material itself, a couple more points on Judas Priest. I mean, again, they came back with a rebound album on Painkiller. I mean, it's no secret Turbo and Ram It Down were, probably not their best commercial successful albums. Their reputation was kind of in the clunker at that point, but they turned it back around. They had that big US tour with Megadeth and Testament and Alice Cooper in the summer, Operation Rock and Roll. And I think that one threw us for a curveball. Rob shaved his head. He had the tattoo on his head. He looked cool, a cool video for Painkiller. And then, again, Vince said it before. It was like Pantera was the rage, and everybody wanted to be with Pantera. Rob Halford was no exception. The Buffy the Vampire Slayer movie soundtrack, they do Light Comes Out of Black, right? He does it with Diamond Vin, right? That prompts him to say, I want to do something heavier. I want to step away from Priest for a little while and do a solo project. And I think the British guys, KK and Glenn probably said, well, what the fuck? We don't do that stuff here. And off it went. Right. So, it was a weird time. They had also coming off that period of the Reno court case for those kids that had shot themselves and passed away. Rob was angry at this time, right? And like you say, it wasn't just the coming out of the closet. He was angry, and it came out in the music. But, we're not talking about Rob here. We're talking about Ripper. So, Vince, tell the story. Like, how did Ripper get into the band?
Long story short, I believe it was a search for singers, and they found him out of a Judas Priest cover band or tribute band, however you want to call it, called British Steel. Someone passed the video along, I believe, right? And it was seen by the members of the band, or Scott Travis, I think, played a role in it as well. Yeah. And then it went from there.
Imagine that, like a VHS tape takes... somebody hands it, and here you go. Check this guy out. Where's Judas Priest? Oh, I don't know. Rob's out doing Fight. Oh, well, maybe they meet a singer. Like, I wonder if they were actually looking for a singer, or somebody just said, "Here, check this tape out." Right. And here comes Ripper. But the album Jugulator. I know. I think we may have some mixed opinions on this one. Vince, what's your overall take on Jugulator?
I think they tried to outfight Fight, if you want me to be honest with you. Definitely the guitars were amped up. I don't think there's many songs on this Jugulator album that wouldn't have been out of place on that Fight album, or one of them at least, either Small Daily Space or War of Words. I think they saw what Rob did, and I just think that they took that formula, and said, let's put our Judas Priest spin on it, and it went from there. I really think that they just tried to outfight Fight, in my opinion.
That's actually a brilliant perspective on that. I think you're completely right, because this was a heavy album. I'm looking at the CD, I mean, being a Priest fan, even this, I was like, holy shit, this is heavy. The title track, Jugulator, Dead Meat, Death Row. I mean, and just think of listen to the topics: decapitate, burn in hell, brain dead, right? Like, it was really, really heavy, like beyond just thrashy, new wave of British heavy metal Judas Priest. So Ian, what was your take on this album?
Well, Vince said it perfectly, but I this goes back to that, the conversation we just had regarding Motley Crue, and Anthrax for that time period. You're talking that early to mid 90s shift. You saw Halford do it with his projects, and you were right. He was angry. He had, there was a lot of stuff going on, but that there was an impact. Think about what had occurred. Pantera played with Priest in 90, 91 in Europe, Moscow, right? And then they did they played again with Metallica. So you had all of these big bands, all of this heavy, dark or darker music, plotting, more, methodical, more diabolical. Everything was doing it at the time. And these guys jumped on the bandwagon. I personally don't particularly care for both of the albums that much. There's a handful of songs that I think are great, but I didn't like the fact that you have an album like Painkiller, which you and I have discussed before. That is like one of those quintessential albums. Yeah. They come in with this, and as much as I love heavy metal and as heavy as this was, it was too much of a deviation from what a Priest sound is. When you hear what they started, when they came back later on, it sounded like that evolution post Painkiller for Priest. This didn't, but just like you had said before, sounds like new singer, new band kind of thing. You almost wonder if some of these bands should have said, we're not going to call it Judas Priest, we're going to call it this. But then they would have had no teeth in the sales. So.
And initially, when Jugulator came out and they went on the road, and I saw it, I think 2 or 3 times, I was excited because I was curious. Number one, who is this guy? Sure. And I was still on the high of Fight. I was still on the high of Painkiller. And I'm like, this is Judas Priest. And it was like, the odds are against them. This is like, let's see what this new guy has. And they capitalized on that. Sure. It was the replacement singer from the tribute band, but he didn't look like Rob. But right. Then they nicknamed him the Ripper off of the song, and it was like, Glenn and KK just pointing at him, look what our new guy can do. It was like he was in the spotlight. And I think the shows were energetic. Sure. They did,
of course,
classic 2-hour set of all the songs you wanted to hear, plus the new stuff. I saw them at the Roseland, a few other places, Hammerstein Ballrooms. Now, and compared to the other bands we were talking about, Priest was still playing at least a little bit bigger places, right? They were playing bigger places than Maiden, if you think about that at that time. Now, in this day and age, it's the opposite. Anthrax wasn't playing big places like this, so Priest was still sustaining themselves.
Sure.
I think the second album fell flat. Demolition, I think, I don't go to Demolition ever. I remember the song One on One, the single that came out. It was just meh at best. Tried to be a little poppy, catchy, radio friendly, just fell flat. And now at that point of their career, now they're playing the clubs. I saw them up at the Chance in Poughkeepsie,
Oh, really?
Small little tiny place, which by the way, the Chance just played its final show ever this past weekend. Doors are closed.
Saw that.
Yeah.
Well, so I think even KK even admitted to the fact that on Demolition, he half-assed it. He had a feeling that the album was going to go nowhere, and he said that he basically put very little effort into it. That being said, I think Hell Is Home is a banger. That's a good song. That's a great song. But the rest of it, like some of these other albums, they just suffer from being too long. Like there was this point in the night where like every band thought they had to put an hour out length album out. A lot of these bands could have just condensed to like a 45-minute album and they would have had much better albums, but they just had to fill the space of CDs and they had to put 15 songs, 16 songs over an hour, and it just drags. Like you can't fill that much space and be that, Well, the one thing that you're starting to see at this time with the CD world is we grew up, coming from the 70s and the 80s into the 90s, album formatted recordings, 8, 9, maybe 10 songs max. Once you started getting into that CD, and those bands were putting albums out a little bit more consistently.
once you got to this point later on, especially in this situation, Lance said it perfectly. These guys didn't have the draw, so they had to try to recoup some money and maybe take a year or two to try to recover and then come back out and see if they could do it again. So you had material that would hopefully carry people over as long as the next wave of something didn't come in and completely blow them off the shores. The one thing to, on Demolition, I thought it was a killer starting track with Machine Man. Scott Travis coming in, that freaking double kick, and the riffs. But again, I remember listening to it again, and I'm thinking to myself, I go, it doesn't sound. It sounds more like death metal than it does Judas Priest because of the way that they're playing the guitars. It doesn't have the same kind of rhythm, and melodic flow. Where a Priest, it'd rip your head off, but you could, it's like, you could feel the groove to it and you want to move. So overall, not terrible.
Look at what it did for Ripper though, right? So ultimately it doesn't last. He goes on to play with Iced Earth, Yngwie Malmsteen, solo projects, on and on and on, Dio Disciples. I mean, the guy's last year he put out an EP called Return to Death Row. He wrote with Jamie Jasta from Hatebreed. It's great. And he wanted to go back to the sound of Jugulator. It's a 5-song EP, and it's right off the same sound, the really heavy tracks. But so that's Judas Priest. But guys, we got to wrap this up here. But what we want to talk about now is what ultimately happens, right? Now, these guys, they get their cup of coffee and maybe dips up and down a little bit. And ultimately, all 4 bands go back to their original singer. So since we're on Priest, Ripper leaves in 2002. I think it was maybe a year or two later. I don't remember the year. All of a sudden, the news comes on that Rob Halford's rejoined Judas Priest and they're up going on the Ozfest. Listen, right. I don't know. It's probably no secret. It ran its course and they knew the only path forward was to get Rob back. Rob had tried Fight. He tried 2. He went and did the Halford band with Resurrection, which did well. But ultimately, he was been be in the clubs, or you get back to playing amphitheaters and arenas, and that's what led him back to today.
Sure.
Maiden probably the same. I can't remember, guys. When did Bruce rejoin after Blaze left? I think it was the Brave New World album, probably, right?
Yeah. Because Wicker Man was the first. First
and they had done a tour before that, though. I think they did a tour. Well, I don't know if it was the Somewhere Back in Time tour, 99. They played clubs. And then it turned into doing the album.
Okay, maybe, yeah. It was right around. Go ahead. Sorry,
Ed Hunter or something. Was
yes, that video? Ed Hunter. Yes, the Ed Hunter tour. Correct.
That's right. That was one of the first big appearances I think that they did down in South America too, right? Was that on that tour as well? Because I think that was one of the things that helped kickstart them at that point where you realize that classic Maiden, as we know it, is that big and it's that renowned worldwide. But yeah, it's, I don't, the whole thing with Maiden seemed like it was destined to happen. When Halford kept going from project to project, it almost seemed like he was on his own path. But then all of a sudden, he's back with the band. No, and
the Halford band opened up for Maiden on the Brave New World tour. They were the opening slot before Queensryche.
Yep. And I didn't have a
book that in Halford's book that it was more of a miscommunication between them. Like he never really wanted to quit the band, but somehow got lost in the sauce and he just ended up out of the band. So So I guess Ripper said it the best. He said, Rob needed Priest, Priest needed Rob, and I needed to do something else. So they just came to a mutual agreement and he was back.
Yep. And I don't think there's any bad blood there. I think that anything with the Priest guys is water under the bridge. But I think with Ripper, with the guys in the band, I don't think there's any animosity. No. Look at how fast he joined up with KK when, KK's Priest, came about. KK knew exactly who he wanted. That guy.
I think I think it's kind of a middle finger to the Priest guys, don't you think?
Well, that too, but yeah.
Well, he doesn't get Ripper in there. He's got no product. Let's be honest, right?
Yeah,
True. Yeah.
And then the Anthrax guys. I don't remember Vince. I know I was at the show at Starland. I found the Joey Belladonna reunion show. If you remember, what year was it? Early 2000s or so, where it was a one-off. They were like, they're playing the Starland Ballroom with Joey Belladonna, and they're going to play one show and record a live DVD. And I was like,
first time I was ever there,
right? And you're right. And I remember being almost offended. I was like, why would they do this to John Bush? Like, the guy put out so much good material, and what makes this appealing? Like, I went and it was good, but I almost felt like angry about it,
There was a period of time Anthrax couldn't get out of their own way. I mean, between bad labels and there was a couple years span where they had Bush in the band, and Belladonna came back, and then Bush came back, and then they had that weird Dan Nelson period.
Yeah.
And I think Joey came back again.
Yeah. Corey Taylor was rumored to be in there.
Yeah.
I feel like it's like a contractual thing with Belladonna. I feel like they literally are just business partners, and that's it. And let's be honest, right? Okay. They've been back together for 10, 15 years. What have they put out? 2 studio albums?
Right.
They're good.
To do a third now.
They're good, right. But like 5-6 years in between. At least Priest is continuously do album tour cycle, reinvent themselves. They get back on the road. They play different set lists every leg of the tour. But
did the Big Four thing that had to have sped up the whole process too, right? I mean, they probably wouldn't have been on that bill if it wasn't Joey back.
Right.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
Right. So that probably helped a lot too.
I think that, a lot of people maybe underestimate the control and the ego that Scott Ian has. I love Scott, but I think that he kind of is the one that points the direction for the Anthrax machine to go. And then he'll discuss it with Charlie, and then ultimately Frankie, when he came back to the band, and, whoever the lead guitar player is just a lead guitar player. And then we'll have Joey sing it. That's basically what it looked like. Don't get me wrong. For All Kings, slamming album. Oh my God. I remember when it first came out, I was like, wow, that's classic Anthrax right there.
Worship Music 2 is a banger.
Worship Music 2 is great. Yeah. There's a lot of things that, that could have led up to it, but I do think, though, you're right, Lance. I think that they really did a disservice to John Bush, because I think that John Bush put out a lot of great quality material with them and helped get them to an entirely different level, because they were playing, all right, they were known as Anthrax, but then when the 90s came in, they were known as Anthrax, but then Bush came in and it went like this. They were up playing on this other level. So,
and listen, there's not much to say about Motley Crue. We knew there was only one other path forward. Vince comes back in, they stick around. They're another band that can't get out of their own way. They put a couple albums out. They've toured. They've retired. They're back out there. He's fat. He can't sing. They're playing with tapes. Nobody cares about Motley Crue. Listen, let's be honest. We love the other 3 bands. We don't like Motley Crue. But guys, this has been a great episode. I really thank you for your time. And,
this was fun.
Listeners, we welcome you to check out these episodes. Please go to our podcast channels. Check us out on YouTube, the Metal Mayhem ROC YouTube channel, and all of our socials out there. So, for my co-hosts, Vinyl Vince McDowell and Ian O'Rourke of Motorlord, this is Metal Walt. And remember, keep it fucking heavy.
Metal for life.
Thank you for listening to Metal Mayhem ROC. Check out our website at metalmayhemroc.com for information on podcasts, archives, links to all our live radio shows, and all sorts of info. Please like, follow, and share with everyone, even your non-metal friends. And always remember to keep it heavy.